Good evening, everyone. Welcome to At America. My name is Jasmine. I'm one of the e-guides here at America, and I would be more than happy to answer all your questions regarding At America. But first, before we begin, can we get a round of applause, please, for all of us to warm up this really big room? And we have a special guest from Unicom Bandung. Yeah, and what major? International Relations. Okay. So for those of you who have never been to At America before, At America is the American Culture Center here in Jakarta. We hold diverse events, sharing information about the United States through our events. And now I would like to show you a few of our upcoming events. We're going to have a presentation, 2018 Education USA Law School Fair. This is going to be on Saturday, 21st of April from 1 to 5 p.m. So for those of you who are interested or you know somebody who is interested in maybe pursuing a higher education in the United States about law, you can come to this event. And also, we're going to have a concert, International Jazz Day, Women in Jazz. This is going to be on Friday, 27th of April from 6:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. All of At America's events are for free and no registration is needed. So you can bring all your friends and family together to our events. And also, At America has a facility called Education USA. For those of you who are interested in pursuing a higher education in the United States, we always have 2 advisors standing by who are more than happy to answer all your questions about studying in the US. They're available every day from 1 to 9 p.m., except for Saturdays. They're here a bit earlier from 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. And these are the highlights from the past events that has happened at America. I would like to invite you guys to become our member. It's really easy. Go to our website at www.atamerica.or.id. Click register, fill in your name and your email address, and you will get our free newsletter once a week through your email. And also, At America has lots of social media platforms. Don't forget to follow us on our social media platform. And for those of you who still like to tweet, don't forget to mention us at America with the hashtag @America. And your tweets will be shown over at that wall, at our live tweet wall. All right, so before we start the event, I would like to invite Pak Jed Dornberg from the U.S. Embassy Jakarta for the opening remarks.
Good evening. Thank you all for being here. So I'm from the U.S. Embassy. My name is Jed Dornberg, and we're really very happy to have you here today. We're really excited to have this event and host it here in our center here in Jakarta. And I want to start by thanking the wonderful team here at America that makes all of these events possible. So we give them a round of applause. We also wouldn't be able to put these events together without the partnership of so many different organizations. And tonight, we're very happy to be working with USINDO and with our own organization of young people called YSEALI. YSEALI is the Young Southeast Asian Leadership Initiative. And this is a program that helps, that brings young Indonesians and young people from all over Southeast Asia, throughout ASEAN together to think about how they can be leaders and how they can be leaders right now and how they can put that into practice. It's a great program. So it's from 18 to 35. So if you want to sign up for it, go to the website, sign up US ASEAN YSEALI, and you can find out the sign-up page for that program. It's very exciting, and we're very happy to have that. So today we have a number of speakers who are going to come up and speak to you, and they're going to talk a little bit about reform and civic participation, how you get involved in issues and questions that are pertinent to you today. And they're going to look a little bit at judicial reform and the justice system and how participants can play a role in helping to determine what the issues are, what the problems and the solutions might be to problems that they face today. And this is very important to the U.S. Embassy because we believe that citizens should have an active role in improving the society that you live in today and being a leader right now. So without much more ado, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Pak Jed. And now to start the event, I would like to invite our moderator for today. Please give a warm welcome for Anindita, Listya, USINDO, YSEALI Pro Fellow Alumni.
Okay, thank you so much, Yasmin. Selamat malam semua. Good evening all, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and speakers. Thank you very much for being here for this insightful discussion. And I'm Anindita Kusuma Listya. I am an alumni of the YSEALI Professional Fellowship. And yeah, thank you, Ibu. Yeah, so I participated in this program, YSEALI program last year during the spring 2017. And now in Indonesia, I work for the Indonesian House of Representatives, especially at the Secretariat of GOPEC, Global Organization of Parliamentarians Against Corruption, which is now being chaired by Indonesia. And thank you. Yeah, so tonight I'm really honored to moderate this session and on this forum on transparency in the criminal justice system, system reform, and civic engagement. And with that, I would like to say that we are incredibly lucky to have three excellent speakers tonight. So without further ado, I would like to introduce them and invite them to come aboard here to the stage and give their presentation. And we will also have a time for discussion. So if you want to raise some question, we will have around 45 minutes for as many questions as you can think of. So first, I would like to introduce our first speaker tonight. He is Mr. Michael Kagay. He's the district attorney of the Shawnee County, the 3rd Judicial District of Kansas. And he took office as district attorney on January 9th, 2017. Prior to being elected as district attorney, he first served in the Shawnee County District Attorney's Office as an assistant district attorney in the Family Law Division, where he prosecuted juvenile offenders and protected children in need of care. So without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Michael Kagay. And then the next speaker, we have Mr. MacHarg, who is the Director of Civic Engagement at the Appalachian State University, where he focuses on how civic participation can promote democratic values and facilitate learning. He has led workshops on civic engagement, civic discourse, service learning, and civic leadership in countries around the world, including Myanmar, Bangladesh, Cuba, Ukraine, Rwanda, Taiwan, Dominican Republic, Myanmar, Niger, Benin, and also Indonesia. So please welcome Mr. MacHarg. And the last speaker, who is also my senior at the University of Indonesia, he is Choky Ramadhan, the chairman of the Indonesia Judiciary Monitoring Society of MaPPI, FHUI. Prior to that role, he was the executive director of MaPPI and has been a researcher there since 2010. He served as the head of special unit on alumni relation at the Faculty of Law, University in Indonesia, where he also teaches civil procedure law and anti-corruption courses. So without further ado, please welcome Mr. Choky Ramadhan. Yeah. Welcome and thank you all speakers. So we will start our discussion with Mr. Kagay first. I forgot to mention that during my fellowship program last year, I had a great pleasure to work with him at his office. Thank you, Pak.
Thank you for being there.
Thank you for accepting me. Yeah, and then now he will talk about the current state of the transparency in the judicial, in the criminal justice system in Kansas, and also how you work to improve that, and what is like the innovation and the reformation that is going on now. Please, I give you like 20 minutes. Yeah.
Thank you, Dita. Good evening, everyone. I'm just curious, by a show of hands, Does anyone know where Topeka, Kansas is? I see a few. Okay. Well, for those of you who don't know, Topeka is the capital city of Kansas, and Kansas is pretty much smack dab in the middle of the United States. So if you look at a map, you look at a globe, you look at the USA, put your finger in the middle, that's where I'm from. The Topeka is the capital city, and it comprises the bulk of my constituency, the people that I serve in my community. There are some smaller communities around the capital, but all told, my district covers just under 200,000 people. So not equivalent to a large city like Jakarta, but it's my understanding that Bogor City is approximately the same size. So for reference. First off, this is kind of an obvious question, but can anyone tell me why transparency in government is important? Anybody? It's open-ended. Any brave souls in the audience tonight? Okay. Well, I assume you are all brave, but I'll go ahead and answer because I'm the one with the microphone. For me, transparency in government is critical because I got into my position because I want to serve my community. I want to help people. And the people that I serve have to know the work I'm doing is in line with what they want. I'm accountable to them. I'm not accountable to anybody else. I don't have a job where I report to a boss every day. I don't have a supervisor. So in a broader sense, my community is my supervisor. I'm responsible to them. And I try and hold myself to a very high standard because of that. And one of the things that I focused on when I took office in 2017 was making sure that all of our policies, all of our internal priorities, things that we were working on in a prosecution office were readily available to the public, the community that we serve. We had kind of an outdated website. We had a bunch of policies as far as the focus we were going to prosecute cases, how we were going to handle that. If any of you know what diversions are, we revised our diversion policies and we updated those, and I'll talk about that here in a minute. But the bottom line is the work had not been done to achieve transparency before I took over, at least not to the level that I would hope. And I had been in the office for a few years. It just wasn't a priority. Well, it's a priority of mine to do that. And along with that transparency, you have an opportunity to reform and not to change policies just for the sake of change. You know, I don't believe in just changing something just to say you've done it. You have to make it better. And if you're not making it better, then don't do it. So we took a pretty lasered focus from January of 17 when I got into the DA's office to look at all of our policies top to bottom. And it was a monumental task because you're talking about an office that's responsible for prosecution of every type of crime imaginable in that district. We've been doing it for a long time, so there are a lot of different policies that go into that. And so we started out, with the obvious ones. We updated our website. We put, current personnel information, current lineup of the office. Who's doing what kind of crimes do we prosecute? What are some resources that people in our community can use? Things of that nature. And then I wanted to focus on our diversion program. And I'll talk about that because one of our topics tonight is reform. And there is a feeling in the United States, in a lot of prosecution circles, that your job as the prosecutor is to, find somebody who's committed the crime and then hold them accountable. And you hear this phrase a lot. We're going to prosecute him to the fullest extent of the law. Okay? Raise your hand if you've heard that before. Prosecutors love saying that. I think I've said it once or twice. You know, but it was for someone that needed it. So that's kind of the old school thought is, well, let's just throw the book at him. You know, let's get everything we can out of the case. And I'm not saying that's not appropriate at times, because it absolutely is. If someone's committed a horrible crime, if they've murdered someone, for example, I'm not looking to cut that person any slack. But on the other side of it, you know, you might have someone who's committed property crime. They broke into somebody's car and they stole some money, or they broke into a business and they took some things off the shelf. Under the law in my state, that person's not going to go to prison anyway. So what do you do with someone like that? Well, you can either just, you know, call it what it is and make a decision on resolving that case or prosecuting that case to the fullest extent of the law. Or you can take a look at what's driving this behavior. Why is this person committing crimes in the first place? What's the broader objective here? For me, it's not about you know, just prosecuting criminals. It's about helping my community. It's about making sure that there's a balance. You know, the key to life is balance, and the key to justice is no different. So how do you achieve that? Well, what I have found, is that there are a lot of underlying causes that run parallel to each other when we're talking about motivations for crime. So I'm sure you all know that for a crime to occur, there really only has to be motive to commit the crime. Somebody wants to do this, and the opportunity to do it as well. So there's a twofold approach there where you can engage with your community, and this is part, going back to transparency for a second, part of my responsibility as I see it is public awareness, public education, making sure that people know maybe the latest trends in my community, and you can do that by doing a press release, and I do a lot of those. I will do interviews on local television. I'll sit down with the local newspaper and I'll talk to them. But my favorite method is actually going out in the community and talking to people face to face, just like this. I am always excited when I get an invitation to go out and visit with people, whether they're students or you know, a neighborhood watch group or what have you, and let them know about the work that we're doing and what our focus is, and really get them to engage in a meaningful dialogue. And I'm hoping we can have some of that here tonight when we get to the question and answer session, because as much as someone in the audience might want to ask me a question, I want to know what they're thinking. I want to know what they're interested in. What are they curious about? Because that interests me, especially when we're talking about the people you know, that we are elected to serve. And so, going back to diversion for a moment, you know, what do you do? How do you find that balance? How do you keep somebody accountable, but at the same time get them churned in the right direction? Maybe this is somebody who is struggling with some form of mental illness. Maybe it's somebody who simply does not have a positive role model in their life. You know, they've grown up with a lot of free time on their hands, and they're not really sure what they want to make of themselves yet. So it's kind of you know, it's a case-by-case analysis, really. But the bottom line is, a diversion it's a deferred prosecution. You make an agreement with the defendant not to move forward and convict them. And in exchange, they have to follow a preset of conditions. You know, maybe they have to go get anger management. Maybe they have to go get counseling for something else. And they always have to remain crime-free during that period of time. So is it the answer to every case? No, not at all. I think the national average in the United States for diversion is about 9%. So about 9% of felony cases are going by way of diversion right now in the U.S. In the 3rd Judicial District of Kansas, where I'm the DA, I think we're right around 8%, so we're a little bit below that average. But it's not about diversion. It's not about prosecuting them to the fullest extent. It's not about any single one of those things. It's just about making sure that you have all of the tools to be the most effective that you can be at achieving the overall goal, which, as I said earlier, is not just about holding people accountable. It's about improving the community. It's about securing public safety and helping people make good decisions. At the end of the day, you can prosecute somebody for the same crime again and again and again, or maybe you could catch them the first time they do something wrong and get them focused, get them educated, and get them going in the right direction so that they can lead a productive and meaningful existence in your community. So all that to say, we focused on revamping our diversion policies, making sure they were in line with state law, but also trying to make sure that they were fair. There were some rules in there that seemed kind of arbitrary, and to me, you can't really be fair. You can't really achieve justice if you're not being consistent with everybody. Regardless of who they are, where they come from, what they believe, any of those things. You have to be consistent if you want to achieve any kind of fairness. So we focused on that. We revamped those policies. We actually had a report released in the state of Kansas by the ACLU, and they were condemning the prosecution practices in the state, but they actually highlighted my office and our diversion policies as an example of what they called being smart on crime or smart diversion practices. So I didn't know the ACLU was going to write a report about me when we decided to change it. We did it because we thought it was the right thing to do. And after that, we went about revising everything else through the office. We don't have time to cover everything, but that's the gist of the reform and the transparency focus that I had personally in my office since taking over. Beyond that, in the state of Kansas, there have been a couple issues that are pretty hot-button topics, one of them being body-worn cameras for law enforcement officers. For years and years and years, when a police officer was called out to a scene, he would show up, he would interview whoever made the call, interview all the suspects, collect evidence, write a report, and then submit it to the prosecutor. And that's what you have, right? That's the extent of it. Well, in 2014, in Kansas, most of the law enforcement officers started wearing these body-worn cameras, either on their visor or on their shoulder. And so it's recording everything that they see. So now they go out to the scene, they're interviewing a witness, they're interviewing a victim, and everything that's happening, everything that they see is being recorded. And so there's this huge wealth of information that's available now to the prosecutor when they're trying to decide what kind of crime was committed. Was a crime committed, first of all? And then if so, what type? What is the evidence that supports that? And you don't have to simply rely on another person's observations for that, because you can go to the video. But it's opened up Pandora's box, so to speak. There are a number of issues there because, first of all, if you have video from every single officer who goes to the scene, you have, on some of these cases, hundreds and hundreds of hours of video. Now, I don't mind sitting down and binge watching Netflix, for hundreds of hours, but sometimes it's hard on each case to have that time to go through and analyze everything that was said. Previously, you could just rely on the word of an officer and just assume that that's correct. Well, I'm not saying you can't do that anymore, but if there's a discrepancy between what was written in a report and what's on the video, now you have a problem. So when I said, Pandora's box, that's what I'm referring to. So you have to catalog the video. You have to make sure that information is available. But if there's a discrepancy between what the police officer has said and what's in the video, you have a different issue. And this goes back to being transparent. You have to make sure that that discrepancy is documented, and then it's handed over to the defense, to the defendant and the defense attorney. And, there's a lot of talk in prosecution circles about how to do that and what's appropriate. We err on the side of caution. If we think that there's a conflict or we think that there's a potential issue, we hand it over. I'd rather do that and not have to do it. Better careful than sorry is essentially how we apply that. So body-worn cameras, a big issue because you develop an expectation that they're going to be used in every single case. And they should be used in every single case if they're available. But, life being what it is and people being people, sometimes the equipment malfunctions. Sometimes someone forgets to turn it on. And then, people cry foul and say, well, something is amiss. Something's wrong here because we don't have our video. And so Kansas has enacted some reform around this, some statutory requirements that on specific cases, most notably homicide cases and rape cases, that if you're interviewing a suspect, those interviews have to be recorded. If they're not recorded, then they can't be used. So that's kind of a harsh penalty. You could have someone confess to committing a murder, but if you have not recorded it, you can't use it. I can't use it. So there's some teeth in that. Beyond that, there's also been quite a push in the state for reform on asset forfeiture law. And very briefly, because I think I'm running low on time, asset forfeiture, in this case civil asset forfeiture, is when you're stopped by the police and they suspect you have committed a crime. They don't prove that you've committed a crime. I don't prove that you've committed a crime. But because something was suspicious about the property that you had, that property is forfeited. And then the police agency then is able to use those monies to fund training or new vehicles and the like. So there's a lot of potential for abuse there because there's not a lot of transparency. Historically, those agencies were not required to track that data and make it public at the same time. There is a method for obtaining the information, but it's unduly burdensome. And so one thing that the Kansas legislature just addressed this year was making sure that every law enforcement agency has to track that information. When they take your property, they have to track what they took. They have to track if they've spent it and what those specific circumstances were. So that, I think, overall is an encouraging sign. I believe that, locally back home, transparency is making progress. I think we're headed in the right direction. I will say this: a lot of people, when I talk to them in my community, I think, confuse transparency a little bit with I want it right now. And transparency doesn't mean right now. Transparency just means clarity, having an understanding, being open and honest about things. So sometimes, you know, when an investigation is pending, we can't, you know, I can't go on the 6 o'clock news and tell everyone, well, here's the latest in the police investigation, and here are the names of all the witnesses, and, you know, for obvious reasons, you can't do that. But at the appropriate time, to be open about what's occurred there, I think is important. So overall, quite a lot of progress has been made. I've done what I can to the point that we've reached in my office, but the state overall, I think, is making meaningful progress, and I think we're heading in the right direction. How are we on time? 5 more minutes? All right. So, yeah, well, I thought that was the end of my talk, and it turns out I have 5 more minutes. So, I know this isn't scheduled, but does anyone have any questions on what I've been discussing to this point? I see a hand back here. Can I come back there? Okay, all right.
My name is Abdullah. I want to deliver a question about racial discrimination in the U.S. by the police. What is your personal opinion about the popular hashtag about Black Lives Matters? That's all. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for the question. And that's a great question. Honestly, it's something I should have touched on already. So thank you for bringing that up. There is a lot of racial tension in different communities around the United States. You know, we personally experienced some in a police shooting that I had last year in my jurisdiction. And, you know, it's a difficult thing for me to really render an opinion on it, because I don't have the experience of growing up and being a minority. I don't have that. I have you know, friends who have told me what that was like, have told me and shared their experiences, and I've heard things that made me cringe. You know, I've heard stories that I thought were horrible, but you know, it's one thing to hear things secondhand; it's another to experience them yourself. So it's difficult for me to really, you know, pretend like I'm an expert on that particular issue. I will tell you what we saw during the case last year, and I'll just talk about it briefly. There was an African-American male who was in a public park. This was in Topeka, where I live. And he had a firearm. He had a girlfriend with him. 2 police officers were dispatched to the park on a report of shots being fired, which in that particular park was not unusual. You know, that happens maybe 50 times a year that, you know, someone could hear gunshots. And so they respond, and, you know, and an officer is trained when you get a call that shots have been fired, you need to be ready for anything, okay? If someone has a gun, I got to be ready to go. And this was 9 o'clock in the morning, so they make contact with the male and his girlfriend. They're the only 2 people in the park. They start trying to talk to the guy, and he's walking away from them. Come to find out later, he had been sitting on a park bench next to his girlfriend, and when the police officer showed up, he had a gun that he was sitting next to. And he had a prior conviction for being a felon in possession of a firearm, which is under Kansas state law, if you're convicted of a specific type of felony, you're not allowed to possess, well, really any felony, you're not allowed to possess for a gun for 5 years. Some felonies, it's longer. But he had prior history. He knew he couldn't have a gun. If the cops caught him with a gun, he was going to go to jail that day, and then he would come through my office and go to prison. So his girlfriend saw the police coming and said, take the gun and go, dump it over there in those bushes. And so he tried to, but the officers were calling to him, trying to get his attention, and then they were following him. They're investigating reports of shots fired. They're talking to this guy, and he won't look at them. He's walking away. They want to know what's going on. Ultimately, there came a point in time where everyone stopped and they're talking together, and the police officer's asking questions, and he's telling them why he's there. This man is saying, I don't know anything, I haven't heard anything. Ultimately, a second officer who was there is standing behind this man, and he sees a gun in his pocket. And when he sees the gun in his pocket, he says, he's got a gun. And at that point, both officers move forward to try and physically restrain this young man. And he resisted them, he struggled with them, he broke free, and he started to run. And as he ran, the gun was in his left short pocket. As he was running, his right arm was kind of swinging back and forth like you would if you were sprinting. But his left hand stayed down here. So if you can visualize, he's running away, and he has his left hand down here where the gun is. Well, both officers drew their service weapons, and they discharged. And he was struck 3 times, once fatally. And so, going back to transparency, everyone wanted to know what happened. Everyone wanted to see the video because there was a video. But Kansas has specific laws that say if I'm going to prosecute somebody, say for a homicide, I can't give evidence to the media because it could sway, public opinion. If I have, say, a video of someone committing a crime, I can't just give it to the TV people and let them run it because it's going to be hard for me to find a jury, because we use a jury system, to hear the case and see the evidence impartially and render a verdict. So I had all these media requests and community members who wanted the video. They wanted to know what's going on, and they were crying foul, saying, well, you guys aren't being transparent. And so there was tension there. I'm there saying, well, the rules don't allow me to do it. If we don't move forward on this case, you're going to have it. And ultimately, when we did the analysis, the legal analysis under Kansas law, and we did a still frame by frame of the video, I made the decision that we were not going to prosecute. And when I did that, I held a press conference. I invited all of the media in. They were in my office. I played the video for the first time. No one had seen the video before that, but they did. And I explained in depth the reasons why I made that decision. So I do know that throughout that process, a lot of, well, I shouldn't say a lot, but there was a significant vocal section of our community, minority community, that was very, very concerned based on what had transpired because, as I said, the young man was African American, the 2 officers were white. And so I got a lot of questions. I met with community leaders of different races, and I got a lot of questions about that. Sorry, I think I've gone over my time. If there's time later in the Q&A, I'll get back to it. Great question. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you very much. I can take that there is the ongoing revision on diversion practices to make it more consistent and transparent. And in the state level, there are also the reformation of the regulation of the asset seizure during the criminal investigation, and also the implementation of the use of the body cam during the criminal investigation as well. So thank you very much, Mike, for sharing it with us. And The next speaker, we would love to hear more from Mr. Brian MacHarg about how the civic engagement will contribute as a critical tool for this transparency.
Well, hello, everybody, and particular shout out to YSEALI folks. I work with the Mandela Washington Fellowship Program, part of the YALI initiative, that is young fellows from around the continent of Africa. My institution hosts a cohort every summer, and I know how talented YALI folks are, and so therefore it stands to reason that the YSEALI folks are equally as talented. So I'm sort of the oddball on this stage. So you have a district attorney here, and you have a professor of law, and you have me, and I have nothing to do with the law. I teach civic engagement, and I encourage both faculty and students to get involved in their communities. But as I began to think about this talk, I wanted to talk about seeing. Seeing our communities and seeing others, and therefore the transparency that's necessary if we are to have healthy communities where we can actually live in peace with one another. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Think about the problems that are facing your neighborhoods, or your country, or your region. What are the concerns that you have? What are the issues that bother you? When you think about the news or your local community, what are the things that, as we say in America, get you in your gut? What are those issues? Well, how come stuff either gets done or does not get done in solving these issues? And if we are to solve problems in our communities, we have to follow through these 4 steps. First, we see the problem, and there's the connection to transparency. We know what to do, we are willing to do something, and then we actually follow through. First, we see the problem. Martin Luther King, a great leader in America, had this quote after he went to Montgomery, Alabama. This was after he got his PhD, and he arrived in Montgomery, Alabama in the 1950s, a very segregated city, rife with racism. And Martin Luther King noticed that, it was a peaceful community in one sense, but he also noted that it wasn't a peaceful community because there was the absence of justice in Montgomery. He said, "I am convinced that men hate each other because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other, and they don't know each other because they don't communicate with each other, and they don't communicate with each other because they are separated from each other." Unless we see each other, unless we know each other's problems, the issues aren't going to get solved. We see the problem. So right now I live in North Carolina up here in the mountains, but for most of my adult life I lived down here in the state of Florida. This is the state of Florida, and most specifically I lived on the West Coast in the Tampa Bay region in the city of St. Petersburg. Now St. Petersburg has an interesting city as a city in the South. And up until even the 1960s, I don't know if you'll see there, but there is Central Avenue North. Central Avenue North is the main dividing street between the north side of St. Petersburg and the south side of St. Petersburg. And as recently as the late 1960s, even early 1970s, if you were an African American north of Central Avenue after dark and you were on your way to work or coming from work, you would be told to go back down to the south side of St. Petersburg. That's how segregated the city of St. Petersburg was. And the problems persist today, even today. This community up here, it's a little bit farther than what maybe I've got a pointer. Oh, I thought I had a pointer, but maybe not. Anyways, you see where the highway takes a little curve there? That's a predominantly African American community. And it has some difficulties. The infant mortality rate on the south side of St. Petersburg for African American babies in actually all of Pinellas County is 16%. That means that 16% of infants that are born, if you're African American in the city of St. Petersburg, you will not reach the age of 2. You will die. The infant mortality rate for Caucasian babies in the same county is 6%. So there's a wide disparity. The graduation rate on the south side of St. Petersburg for African American males is only 20%. That is, if you are an African American young man, first of all, you've got almost a 1 in 5 chance that you're going to die by the time you're 2. And then if you make it that far, you've only got a 1 in 5 chance that you're going to graduate from high school. Well, why is that? Well, back when I went to this college down here, Eckerd College, and I did my student teaching on the south side of St. Petersburg, and what I found in some of the classrooms is that my classroom, I had about 40, 45 kids to a classroom, which is far too big of a class. We had one set of textbooks that were in the far corner of the room that at the end of the first period English class, the students had to put the books away. And then second period came and got those same textbooks. And when they were done, the third period got it. So there was one set of textbooks for all of my students, mostly African-American students. But when I did my observations on the north side of St. Petersburg, in the Caucasian parts of St. Petersburg, I found that students there each had their own textbook that they could take home at night. They didn't have to give theirs up at the end of the class period. And moreover, they had the newer edition of the textbook, whereas I was working off the older edition of the textbook. So it's no wonder that the graduation rate for African-American males in St. Petersburg is only 20%. And by the way, also, if there's something that needs to be built in the city, such as a sewage treatment plant or a homeless shelter that needs to be built, it's not built up in the white part of town. It's typically built on the south side. So why am I talking about all this? Because out here in St. Petersburg, on these islands, are some of the most wealthy homes that you can imagine. The sort of homes that you see in movies or in a music video, huge mansions that are on the water. But back in the 1970s, there was a problem because as folks would leave the islands to go downtown St. Petersburg, they had to go through the African-American part of town. And some people found that distasteful. So what they did is they built Highway 275 that cut right through the African-American part of town. And in fact, it's elevated above the city. And so the people who lived in the very wealthy homes out here on the islands, they never had to see the problems that were on the south side of St. Petersburg. They didn't see the crumbling housing, the substandard health care, the substandard education that exists there. So this is my point. We have to see the problem. If we don't see the problem, then we can't solve some of the problems within our community. And in fact, in the late 1990s, there were some unrest, some riots that took place on the south side of St. Petersburg. And the people who lived out on the islands were like, I don't understand what's going on. Why are these people so upset? Because they had never seen with their own eyes some of the issues that were going on. We have to see the problem, and we have to see each other if we're going to live in a transparent and healthy community. We know what to do. This is the second step. Now, Plato's Republic is probably the most foundational text in all of the West, other than perhaps the Christian Bible or the Judeo-Christian text. It's said that all of philosophy and history in the West is a footnote to Plato. And Plato had this very important idea. He called it the allegory of the cave. And he believed, and this is just a little story to sort of make a point, right? It's not a literal thing, it's just a story. He asked his readers to envision people in a cave that are chained in a cave. And they can't look to the side, they can't look behind them, they can only look straight ahead. They're chained that way. And what do they see? They see shadows that are projected on a wall by a fire. Well, what has a tendency to happen is that what these people see is not really the truth because they're just seeing shadows, right? They're deceived in what they're seeing. So they're being told one thing. And Plato said that this is us, right? This is our job as critical thinkers. If we really want to solve the problems in society and address issues of truth and justice, we have to be able to see things as they really are and not just the shadows on the wall. So how do we get our information? Is really what we're seeing accurate? Plato would say no. Plato would say, you know, the news that you get in your Facebook feed are the shadows on the wall. The things that sometimes your parents have told you or maybe your religious leaders have told you could be the shadows on the wall. The places where you get your sources of news, we have to think critically because we might be looking at the shadows on the wall. So this idea of transparency a little bit is sometimes what's before us can be a little bit deceiving. And it's our job as educated people in a society to kind of look through that and to be to look with as clear eyes as possible what the truth is. So Plato had this idea, and this is another artistic representation, that hopefully someone could escape being chained and get past the fire and get out into the bright sunshine where the truth is and actually see things for what they really are. And unless that happens, we will remain unenlightened and unable to solve some of the problems in our world. But he said this was a challenge. Sometimes, as Plato depicted, when the person comes out of the cave, the truth is so difficult that we want to go back to the comfort of the cave. Plato said that the person who escapes the cave wants to go back to the cave because it's dark and comfortable, it's what I know. But when we see things shed in the light of day, it can expose uncomfortable truths. Sometimes uncomfortable truths about ourselves. Sometimes uncomfortable truths about our participation in unjust systems. So Plato says we have to be willing to move forward and really stand in sort of the bright light, the sunshine light of day, and to be exposed to the truth as difficult as it may be, and be willing to do that. Sometimes maybe we're like this creature that comes up out of the cave, and we say to ourselves when stuff gets done, well, you know, I'm kind of ugly. I'm not so talented. I'm not so educated. I'm pretty young. Maybe I can't solve some of these issues. And that's one of our obstacles to being willing as well. We come out of the cave and we see ourselves for what we are, and we're discouraged sometimes at that. And then we actually follow through. But unless we follow these 4 steps and actually see with our eyes the problems that exist in the world, the issues will not be addressed. Why are secrets kept by leaders? Well, typically for 2 reasons, right? Whether it be a government leader or whether it be a corporate leader. Because something is really good. So here's a picture in Atlanta, Georgia of the vault where they keep the recipe for Coca-Cola, right? Very valuable thing. People would love to get their hands on the recipe for Coca-Cola. It's a very successful company. And you can go to the museum and see this vault where the recipe is kept. That's a really good thing. But sometimes things stink, right? And that's why leaders have a tendency to want to hide things from us. And so it's our job as responsible citizens to try to discern, well, what is really being exposed here? Is it something that's good and proprietary, or is it because maybe something stinks and that needs to be sort of shown the light of day in full transparency as well? So Kafka had this idea about a government system which was very confusing in a world in which sometimes the more that sort of societal, community, or government systems become confusing, we can't see clearly about what goes on, and therefore we end up despairing as a result of that. It leads to despair within the human condition, and he talked about this, Kafka, in his book, The Trial. So transparency, I would say, equals community. This woman here is Jane Jacobs. She wrote a famous book called The Death and Life of Great American Cities, and she talked about what community really looked like, and foundational to her opinion about how community, or whether communities are strong or not, was based on their level of transparency. At the time in which she wrote, in the 1960s, and mostly she focused on neighborhoods in New York City, she noted that people were saying in the newspapers that, oh, such and such a community is a bad neighborhood. It's a dangerous community. And some of that was because of racial attitudes that people had at the time. But Jane Jacobs visited these neighborhoods, and she said, no, these neighborhoods are actually very healthy because people are talking with one another. They're seeing each other. They're looking at each other. In fact, she said that there are certain elements that make positive communities. Eyes on the street, frequency and diversity of interaction, and whether there are public characters. Eyes on the street. So Jane Jacobs' view of how we build community is the extent to which we can actually see one another in community. So here's a very positive example of how a community can see each other. You see all these benches down here and a gathering place, a barbecue pit, and the people who live here can look out the window at their neighbors. They can look across the way at their neighbors. They can see children playing here. They can see the elderly out for a walk. They can kind of like keep an eye on what's going on in a given neighborhood. And if there's trouble, if a character walks through who looks like he or she doesn't belong, the eyes on the street are there to say, hey, this person is trouble. We need to keep a close eye on this. And Jane Jacobs believes strongly that the way buildings are built has a lot to do with whether community and transparency, a community because of transparency would be encouraged. So what she was vehemently opposed to was buildings like this, where someone would walk into it, go into a lobby, and ride an elevator straight up, because there's not the eyes on the street that happens with one another. We don't see each other. If we go right into the building and immediately ride a tube up to our floor, we might see only a limited number of people. So she believed very strongly that the more we see each other, the healthier the community we would have. And these communities that were called so-called dangerous, she said, no, these communities are people sitting there looking at each other. These aren't dangerous communities in any way. They're out on stoops. They're talking with one another. They're spreading gossip. They're sharing the good news of the neighborhood. And that was very important to her. Diversity of interaction. So Jane Jacobs said that the perfect neighborhood is one in which you have a diverse residents there in the community. So you might have a business down below, a hardware store, a barber shop, but up above you have apartments. And maybe this is kind of a typical housing that was in its day, maybe in New York City or a large city. And she said this is really good because you have a mix of people who are coming together in a diverse community. They see each other, and they add different gifts to a given community to make it a better place. In fact, she characterized that the best community you can live in is a place where if you have to leave a key for someone, you could go down to the barber who's down below and say, hey, so-and-so is coming by later to pick up this key. Will you give it to him because I'm going to be out? And the barber who's there all day long keeps an eye on what goes on the street, says, yeah, I'll give this key to that person. The eyes on the street, right? And the diversity that takes place therein. Public character. I don't watch my neighbors, I see them. We make our community safer together. So Jane Jacobs believes strongly in the leader within the community. And typically the public character is not someone who had an official title. It's not someone who was appointed there. It wasn't the mayor of the town or the captain of the block or anything like that. But typically, according to Jane Jacobs, it was somebody who just was respected within the community and kind of knew what was going on and could lead the community because they were very aware of the things that were happening. They saw what was happening in the community, and they could help strengthen it. They could help lead the community. By the way, Jane Jacobs would say that any one of you could be a public character. You are welcome to be the public character in the communities in which you live. To what extent do you take responsibility for your communities? Do you watch what's going on, and are you willing to influence it in positive ways? Okay, so we associate. So I'm going on to a new author here. This is Alexis de Tocqueville, writing in 1835. Alexis de Tocqueville was a Frenchman who made observations of America back in the 19th century, and he traveled America, and he was trying to figure out, well, what makes this democracy work? How does it work in America? And one of the most, my favorite passages out of this book, he says, you know, I noticed that these Americans, they're always forming associations. They're always coming together. And it could be large associations such as the Rotary Club, that's a very large organization that's all throughout the United States, or it could be just a small collection of 2 or 3 people who come together in a neighborhood to solve a problem. But these are the associations that are formed when people talk with one another to solve a given problem. So in the neighborhood that I grew up in, I remember that there was a sort of dangerous curve, and that cars would often drive too fast. So a couple neighbors got together and began to work and say, we need a stop sign here. We're worried that children are going to get hurt if cars are going too fast. And they got together and they saw each other and they talked out this problem of speeding cars to keep the children safe. But that's the associating and looking at each other. So here are a couple other ways in which we see each other. One is this idea of civic reflection. To what extent do we get an opportunity to come together and talk with one another about important ideas? And I'm really happy to hear about this At America Center, which I understand has all kinds of opportunities for people to have conversations about our lives and about our communities and about our country and about what makes our communities strong or not. But unless we talk with one another and have conversations and sometimes arguments in a civil fashion, and see each other eye to eye and share each other's ideas face to face, it's difficult to have problems that are solved within a given community. Other forms of civic participation, which are inclusive of voting and participating in the democratic process, getting others to vote, getting others to register to vote, supporting a candidate who you believe in strongly, who you think can make a positive difference. Traditional volunteering, where we address local causes and we come face to face with members in our community, or maybe a kind of activism where we want to call upon corporations or call upon our government or call upon leaders to make positive changes. So these are other ways that we can participate out in society and out in the real world, seeing each other in a transparent way. Here's my last slide. So there's this saying, Sewu Bona. Sewu Bona. It is a Zulu phrase, Zulu from South Africa, that basically means, I see you. I see you. So a few years ago, I was out in California at an event where former President Bill Clinton was speaking. And he was in a very large auditorium, completely filled up, the largest auditorium at the University of California at Berkeley. And we all listened to his speech, and we all found it very interesting. And I remember President Clinton saying, you know, I learned this saying in Africa, the sawubona, and it means I see you. And he said, I know that you came to see me tonight, former president, and you wanted to hear what I have to say. But don't forget that there were many people at this event that made it happen. There were people who worked the electronics and the microphones and the audio that allowed me to speak. There were people in security who looked after us as we came into the hall tonight to make sure that I was safe and that you were safe. There were people who were going to clean up this hall afterwards, and they're going to sweep the floors and make sure that the place is set to go for the next day. But he said, you know, as you leave tonight, think about saying to the people who are around you, I see you. I recognize the value of what you do and your contribution to our community. No matter how big or small that may be, whether you're the President of the United States or whether you're the person who cleans up and sweeps up the hall after a former President of the United States speaks. We see the person and we value the people in our community around us, and we don't ignore them. Jane Jacobs, she fought for the right for women to vote in America, founded the Hull House in Chicago, wrote at the beginning of the 20th century. She said, we are learning that a standard of social ethics is not attained by traveling a sequestered byway, that is some lonely road by yourself. That's not how we move forward in life, but by mixing on the thronged and common road where all must turn out for one another and at least see the size of one another's burdens. So if I know what your problems are and your concerns are and your worries are, then maybe we can have a better understanding of each other and we can work together to solve problems together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. It's very interesting to see the view on how the dynamic of the community itself is very crucial in enhancing the transparency itself and the other way around as well. So let's move to the last speaker, Pak Choky Ramadhan. He will give us like the current state of the Indonesian transparency in the criminal justice system. I'm sure as chairman of the MaPPI, Indonesian Judicial Monitoring Society, which has been very prolific in producing analysis and research in this in transparency in the criminal justice system. So please welcome Kak Choky.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Choky Ramadhan. Following up discussions about the transparency in the Indonesian criminal justice system, I will give you briefly explanations about two aspects of transparency in our Indonesian criminal justice system. First, the transparency in the criminal process. And the second, the transparency in the criminal justice institutions. These are two aspects that I want to speak about this evening. And I have a question. Why is it important to have a transparency? Why is it important for law enforcement institutions being transparent? Any answer? Yeah? Yeah, it will lead you to good government. Other answer? Yeah? Effective government, okay? The most important thing that the law enforcement has a great authority and power to deprive your rights. If you're being detained by the police, you want to know how long you will be detained by the police. If you're arrested by the police, you want to know what crime that you will be charged of. If your property being seized, you really want to know, is it really important or is it has a correlations with the case or not? So it's important to protect human rights of every citizens. And it's really important for law enforcement institutions to be transparent in their criminal process. In our criminal procedure law, it's been enacted in 1981. It replaced the Dutch law about the criminal procedure. The law only regulated these 4 points. First, you as a defendant has the rights to get informed of the warrant of arrest and detain, and also search and seizure. Interestingly, in our system, Indonesian criminal justice system, the judge's approval is only for search and seizure warrant. So if the police want to detain someone, the police doesn't necessarily have to ask judge for approval. And after being investigated, after being interviewed by the police officer will draft the investigatory report. As a defendant, you only will get those investigatory reports if you're asked the police, if you request to the police. Imagine you're poor, you don't know the law is, you don't have an attorney. You might not use your rights to ask or request the investigatory report. And it happens a lot in our criminal justice system. You have a right to get a copy of indictment. It's a surat dakwaan. So before your case being brought to the court, you will get the bill of indictment. You will know what charge and what evidences that will be used by the prosecutor. Unfortunately, after the case decided by the judge, your rights to get the court decisions, it's a by request. So if you're not requested, we will not get it. And if you request, it's not easy to get it. You will be asked to pay some of money. I have my juniors, he is lawyers. Maybe he can share about the practice to get court decisions, how much money he or his lawyers should pay to the court. Yeah, and these are the problems in our Indonesian criminal justice systems. We have an outdated criminal procedures. It's been enacted in 1981. And the criminal procedures known as one of the law or statute that have been reviewed the most in the Constitutional Court. Next, I will talk about the freedom of information, especially in the law enforcement institutions. Interestingly, the judiciary, the Supreme Court, is a pioneer of the transparency and freedom of information in Indonesia. The Chief of Justice of Indonesia regulated the Chief of Justice decree in 2007. It's a year before the Freedom of Information Act in 2008, enacted by the Parliament. It inspired the Parliament to regulate or enact the Freedom of Information Act. And since then, every law enforcement institutions and other agencies of Indonesia should regulate their internal regulations regarding the freedom of information. So the Supreme Court revised the regulations to the Chief of Justice decree in 2011. That's a great promise. We have regulations now. But in Indonesia, it's totally different between law in the books and law in actions. For example, the police institutions. The police institution has not published any annual report. And you cannot get any information or data in its website. How many cases they solve, what crimes that they investigated the most. You can't get any data. For the prosecutor office or attorney general office, they published the annual report during 2016 and 2011 to 2016. But the recent report, they have not published yet. And in the district level, they have poor information management. You know what? Because the person who's in charge in delivering or managing informations in the district level is the head of sections of the intelligence unit. So it's kind of, conflicting with the role. They have to keep the intelligence and secret informations, but at the same time, they should manage the public informations and deliver it to the public. That's one of the problem. One of the best law enforcement institutions in delivering information is the Supreme Court. As I mentioned earlier, the Supreme Court was a pioneer of the Freedom of Information Act. And since 2007, they have already published their annual report, and it's inspired also other law enforcement institutions. They have uploaded more than 2 million court decisions. And they also developed case tracking system supported by the USAID. And so the defendant, the lawyers, could get information about their case. When will it be heard? And what judges will be sitting to examine their case? How's the result? Who is the prosecutor? You can get those information through the case tracking systems. But it's still imperfect. It still needs to be reformed. For example, if we're talking about the criminal justice or the criminal procedure, the case will be examined by the district court. Compared to other jurisdictions in the Supreme Court, for example, the religious court and administrative court, transparency in district court is the worst. And according to lawyers, there will be asked between 100,000 rupiahs to 2 million rupiah to get court decisions. In their regulations, in Chief of Justice Regulations 2011, it states that you will only be asked for the copy fee. Yeah, for example, for a copy, the page of court decisions, you will be paid for example, 1,000. Most of the court decisions is around 100 pages, right? So 1,000 times 100, it will be 100,000, not 2 million rupiahs. And last, the correctional system. Place to put detainees and prisoners. They have an annual report, 2012 and 2015, and I appreciate their effort. They have a correctional database system. It's really good. You should go to their websites, the SDP. You will get informations updated monthly regarding the number of detainees and prisoners. And they could segregate the data according to the case and also age, whether you're minor prisoners or not, for example. And it's really good. You can access, you can download it, the data in Excel, so you can modify those data into your paper or other publications. However, there's still practice to ask or extort the prisoners to pay bribery in order to get their rights. For example, remissions. Remissions is the prisoner's rights to reduce their prisoner or sentence. They have right, but sometimes they will be asked to pay their money. And there's a reform in the correctional institutions. They will develop the online system, if I'm not mistaken, to get the remissions. You know what? What's the reason that this online system will be developed by the minister? Because one of his family being asked to pay bribe in order to get remissions. So our Minister of Justice pushed to reform these online remissions because one of his family was asked to pay bribe just to get their rights. And it's really sad. Connecting to Brian's presentations, I hope my presentations will give you knowledge or background to see the problems in our or Indonesian criminal justice systems. And I hope during the discussions we will do something and we will follow through the effort to reform the systems. There is a current or ongoing progress in reforming our criminal justice system to the penal code and criminal procedure code. And as a students or as young people, you should monitor or you should say something to your legislator in order to get or have the good criminal justice system. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Choky, and all the three speakers. So before I get into the discussion time with the audience, I would like to give a follow-up question for all of you three. So what kind of like collaborative strategic collaboration or cooperation that do you think could possibly be done by the US and Indonesia? I mean, comparing these different systems, I mean, what can we adapt from each countries? And yeah, and Mr. Brian, what do you see should be done to also engage more citizen participation here, like based on the US experience as well?
Well, I just would mention that I think Indonesia has a number of really great things going on. One is the KKN, which I think is an opportunity for students to practice in the community and connect with local communities. And it's my understanding that that was in fact that KKN was started so that folks who are educated would be aware of issues going on in rural communities. So I think that relates to it, is how do we know what's going on in the distant parts of one's country? And it's my understanding also here that there is a strong sense of a community coming together to solve problems, to address problems. So, you know, I see a lot of similarities between U.S. Systems of civic engagement and service learning and good things that are happening here in Indonesia.
Yeah, I forgot to mention all those reforms that I've been mentioned about the criminal procedure law, about the Freedom of Information Act, about the system in the Supreme Court to upload all court decisions, and about the correctional database system. All reform have been made because of civil society in Indonesia. They're more open to civil society, to university and other experts to give them recommendations to change reform. I think it's a good opportunity compared to before the reformations era, where the law enforcement institutions are really closed, not transparent, and not really cooperative with the citizens. So I think it's a good opportunity to broaden the civic engagement, not only from the faculty of law or human rights activists, but also IT community. It's really been helpful to push or the reform agenda within the law enforcement institutions. For example, the SDP or correctional database system, the court decisions directory, it's been made because of the collaborations between human rights and judicial reform activists and also IT community.
What do you think that can we take from the US?
Well, Dita, to answer your question, you're asking what more can be done. I think tonight is a great example of what can be done. You know, we're here tonight. We're sharing our different areas of expertise, our opinions on the matter. We have a wonderful audience here tonight, so obviously everyone's engaged and interested to find out what those reforms are going to be and how we're going to move forward. I had an opportunity earlier to have a meeting with the dean of a law school here local, and she mentioned to me something I had not considered, which was a lot of scholars from Indonesia are coming to the United States to study and to study law specifically. And so they're getting very familiar with our system and how we do it. And some of that is actually permeating currently with Indonesian legal system. So I thought that was an interesting point. I think it's a great partnership between our countries. I think we both have a lot to learn from each other. I know in the just a couple days I've been here, I'm learning a lot. So yeah, I think we're on the right track.
Thank you. So I will now open the Q&A session. I would like to limit it to 3 questions for this first session. Okay. The first one, Ibu, please. Yeah.
My name is Sirawati Batang Taris. I'm from the USINDO. And one question goes to you, our prosecutor here, the district attorney. How big is the percentage of those people that have been put in jail or that you have considered, that you will check the background, whether they had problems, you know, and whether we need not necessarily put them in jail, but, you know, do something for him so that he can be a better person. Now, of all these human decisions that you have made, how big a percentage have they really been reformed or have they really changed after the judge's sentence? And one question goes to him, our speaker here. I had just recently been to the Pengadilan Negeri in Cibinong to find out about a case of mine. In a way, I was very impressed, actually. It was changed. It was all with the counter, pidana, perdata, etc., etc. And you just cannot walk in, like I did 3 years ago. And then they said, you know, I've forgotten the number of the case, I said, but the name is this guy because I've won the case. I've won the case. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. And then he said, oh, 1 second, what's the name of the guy? They didn't want to leave a house, you know, the ex-wife didn't want to leave my house in another place. So he immediately found it within a few minutes, which is quite impressive for Indonesia. He didn't ask for any money, which he wouldn't get anyway from me. And that was very quick. But I said, how come the Pengadilan Negeri hasn't sent the notice about the court's decision? And his answer was, that is the jaksa's duty. Jaksa, I said. What's the name of the jaksa? So this is the same jaksa at Pengadilan Negeri. And so, oh, his office is there. He says, this is his name. I cannot give you his number. I said, I don't mind. I said, I have his number. So I went to the jaksa. This is just untuk yang lain biar tahu barangkali ya. I went to the jaksa and asked him. He knew me. He says, oh, Ibu, Pak, how come I didn't hear from you? You're supposed to send me the JAXA, the prosecutor. You're supposed to send the court decision. And the answer was, I haven't even received the decision. But how come it's already approved by the Pengadilan Negeri, Pengadilan Tinggi, etc., etc.? I said, can you please check on that? I said, and can you please tell me in how many days I should come back or call you? I said, because it's my right to know. So whose duty is it to announce, inform the what's it called? To me, the one who is having this case. Whose duty? Is it Pengadilan Negeri, Pengadilan Tinggi, Mahkamah Agung, or the JAXA? Can you please explain? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ibu. I will take 2 more questions. Yeah, right there.
Good evening. I want to ask you about the transparency of our government here in Indonesia. Well, I want to ask you, what are the things that we should do as a society and also the government of the Indonesia to make the transparency of the system come true? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And from this side, maybe? Yeah, Bapak.
Maybe my questions to Chakra. Yeah, because you mentioned about the police arrest. I saw in the practice is they have to be 15 days locked in the police arrest. And some maybe, I don't know, maybe usually there is a policy militar, the one who check it, because they're not supposed to be more than 15 people inside the small room for 15 days. How that, and because it's the police authorities, the one who arrest, and then before they turn it into the court, and they can extend it, another 15 days before. So is that it's and some of the case, if they are maybe they are being arrested because of terrorism, it's up to 7 months. That could be how that can be changed. And the second one is, if just say the misdemeanor like traffic ticket that you got, recently is if for usual people, if they say they do not want to plead guilty, they have to deposit money, 500,000, or they just pay like 75 for the motorcycle, and then they just plead guilty that. So how those 2 processes can be changed?
Thank you so much. I will let Mike to answer the first question.
Thank you, Dita, and thank you for the question. That's very insightful. As I understand it, your question is for those defendants that we essentially are trying to get them a break and get them some reform and get them back on the right track. How many of them are successful? How many of them actually make a meaningful change? I can't speak, I think, globally, but in a broader sense, I can answer the question in that there's something tangible in a diversion program that we use where we tell somebody, yes, you've committed a crime. You may have committed a felony crime, but we believe that there's some potential here. We believe that you can, finish your degree and you can go become a nurse, or you can go, maybe you're going into the military or whatever it is. So we do track those numbers. And what I can tell you is that our rate or percentage of people that are on diversion that complete it successfully is above 90%. And the reason I know that is because when they don't complete it successfully, we revoke their diversion and they incur the conviction for the crime that was deferred. So, you look at 8 or 9% of the overall felony caseload that we carry. We have about 2,000 felony cases a year. So 9% of that, and then 9 out of 10 of the people that go on diversion complete it successfully, which means they remain crime-free and they meet all the conditions. So.
Thank you, Mark. I then will like Kak Choky to answer those questions, like as to the authority to announce particular information. And
Yeah. Regarding court decisions, is the court authority to inform you the court decisions. You have the right to ask the court decisions. The court, it's mandatory for the court to give your court decisions to the prosecutor, but it's not mandatory to give it to you. But you have the right to ask. Yeah, ke pengadilan negeri. So, yeah, that happens in practice. As a lawyer, sometimes my friends being asked 2 million rupiahs to get their rights, the court decisions. If they don't have the court decisions, they cannot write or prepare the appeal. It's really hard for them to work properly if they cannot have the court decisions. Panitera. Yeah. And regarding what we should do as a government, I think it's questions to all of us here, but maybe I will respond it. When I was a law student, I really engaged a lot with the discussions and with the civic engagement that have been conducted by any civil society organizations, any community, and any government institutions. In doing so, I will get more information and I will get exposed to the real problems. And I will know what my friends are in proposing reforms in the futures, what are the best practices that have been conducted by the government of Indonesia or other government that been exposed by those forum. And I think it's really important to, engage a lot in every activities, in every discussions, and every issues, and you will know more about what you're interested at, and then you will know your colleagues or friends in proposing reform in the futures. I work with many civil society organizations, mostly human rights organizations like Legal Aid Jakarta, Contrast, Indonesian Corruption Watch, and most of the researchers and attorney have already worked there while I was a student. So it's really important and it's really good to have prior relationship with those people who you really want to work for. And as a government, I think there are a lot of reforms. I saw government institutions, agencies. I think they're already left. Our government have been doing a lot in proposing reform, especially in the criminal justice reform. For example, in 2016, Jokowi published the Paket Revitalisasi Hukum. Basically, there are several strategic actions to revitalize or reform our criminal procedures. But those programs, those policies should be monitored and should be criticized by the citizens. Otherwise, the program or the policy will be stopped. And as my example before, the government also proposed the criminal justice reform agenda through the penal code and the criminal procedure law. However, if you look closely or scrutinize those bills, it's really terrible. Many experts, scholars labeled this penal code as an over-criminalizations law because it criminalized consensual sex. It criminalized someone who displaying contraceptions product, for example. And it criminalized someone who criticized president. And there are so many articles in those bills that really criticize, and you have say to your legislator about this bill, and that's you're gonna do. And regarding the arrest, basically in our criminal procedure law, the arrest period is only 1 day. However, in practice, sometimes police arrest more than 1 day. They could detain someone for 60 days, but it's not arrest. It's different. If you're arrest, you should decide whether you want to put this guy as a suspect or not. And it's completely different. If you're being charged and if you're named as a suspect, the police could conduct what you call the upaya paksa, they could use their power to deprive your rights, to seize your property, to detain, and something like that. So it's completely different. And it's also a problem for terrorist suspect. Sometimes they could put in detained for 7 months, a year, without the proper investigations, without being assisted by the lawyers. And there's a reform to change the terrorist bill. However, some parliament members still want to have longer period of detains for the terrorists. So it's always a battle between human rights activists and the parliament and law enforcement institutions. And regarding your questions about the misdemeanor, the traffic case, I have a technical explanations about this. Maybe I could share you later. But basically, the police institutions inspired by the reform that happened in the Supreme Court. In 2015 or 2016, the Supreme Court issued the regulations to simplify the traffic court process. Okay, and the police, the national police, want to steal the spotlight by issuing other reform. That you can pay with your EDC card and something like that. But those reform have a problems, because if you paid 500,000 rupiah, it could not be disbursed by the prosecutor as the person or law enforcement institution to execute your case. And because of this reform agenda, the prosecutor has the bad report by the BPK. It's become their tanggungan because they could not get the money back. I will explain to you later about these technical issues.
So much, Kak Choky. And then Mr. Brian on what can be done by the government and also civil society to enhance more transparency.
Yeah, I think I would. Obviously, we rely on and we depend on the free press as a way to have a transparent government. But I would suggest that we can't just become dependent on that, what we enjoy with the free press. I think that we are responsible for our own democracy, and we are responsible to be active participants in our democracy. And sometimes that takes a little bit of work. So I used to live in a very small town in Kentucky, very small town, and once a week or maybe once every other week, the little town hall city council got together to talk about issues going on in the town. They're going to raise taxes, lower taxes. And I started going to these meetings, and they were not used to regular residents showing up at these meetings to see the business of the government taking place. They were kind of surprised, like, well, what are you doing here? Well, I'm welcome to be here, aren't I? Well, sure, yeah, come on in. We just don't get that many regular citizens coming in. And it took a bit of work, because on a Thursday night when I could have just been relaxing and watching TV or doing something I wanted to do, I was at this meeting just to find out what was going on in my community. And so I think I would suggest that in order for a transparent government and democracy to exist, we have to be active participants in that. As you think about going to the polls and voting, are you going to vote for the person that someone has told you to vote for, or even the newspaper has told you to vote for, or even the free press has told you to vote for? Or have you taken the time to really study the positions of the various candidates to make sure that you are casting the ballot for the right one? So I think I would suggest that while the free press is vital to a transparent government. That doesn't mean we abdicate our own responsibility to actively participate in government and community actions and to actively participate in gaining the appropriate information so that we can become participants in our great democracies.
Thank you. I think we will have one more cycle. Okay, I think that lady there. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Farah, and I'm from the minority group of ex-Gavatar. You probably have heard about that. I would like to ask for maybe Choky regarding the blasphemy that become really trend in this country. Because about transparency, I think that's probably difficult to explain. Maybe you could give us a little bit explanation about this from your point of view over here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. From this side? Yeah, up there.
Hi everyone, my name is Joshua Collins. I want to ask for Brian for your explanation about civics engagement. My question is how to engage the people who said that I have own business, I have busy with my activities. There's a lot of things I must to do with it, especially in urban area. For example, the workers from Bekasi, they need to leave their home at 5 a.m. and then they spend their life to work from 7 a.m. to until 5 p.m. and they just go home about 8 p.m. So they don't have enough time to just see care with to care with others, to care with their neighbors. So what's your concrete solution for them, for those people? Thank you.
Check. Okay, good evening. Thank you for the opportunities and thank you for fruitful discussions and presentation from the three of the speakers. I would like to ask about, to Brian especially. I understand that for community, they have to see what's the best, what is it? Their cooperation to make more, let's say, more effective legal system or have more effective a way forward to give solutions to other people. But if we're talking about criminal justice, it's rather hard for a group of people to have contribution to enter the criminal, let's say, criminal proceedings. If we're talking about, let's say, civil claims, maybe we can have mediations. Maybe a group of people can have mediations again with the opposing parties. Maybe we can, let's say, we have interest-based approach and versus rights-based approach. We will further, we will encourage the interest rather than the rights from their own self. But if in a criminal court, it's rather difficult to have, like, let's say, the public participation to solve the problem in the criminal process because it's about the attorney or the country represented by the prosecutors to the suspect. So how I still need maybe your clarification how group of people can, let's say, encourage the criminal justice system to have a better, let's say, have a better systems or other else. Because I tend to believe, like, let's say in Jakarta recently, when a group of people have, let's say, power together, they press like certain political figures to be imprisoned or something like that. You know, because it's a pressure from a group of people, and we have a very diversity communities, and most of them have like their own interest. So it's very hard, I mean, to find a solution for this group of people as a public to give solution with the procedural in the justice court. I mean, how it is related. If it's a civil claim, I can understand it, or if it is in, let's say, administrative government or policy, I can understand it. But in the criminal justice court, how can public give, let's say, good pressure to the attorney or to the police, let's say? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will let Brian to answer this question first.
Yeah, so I think there were two questions. So, and I don't know if I'm going to address your concern exactly, but the only thing I can share is I do think that it is a responsibility for all citizens in a given community to take responsibility for the actions of others within the community. So there's a famous passage out of, I think it's Dostoevsky or maybe Tolstoy, great Russian novelist, and there's a passage in one of their novels in which a criminal is about to be convicted of a heinous crime, murder, perhaps rape, a terrible crime. And the judge is ready to hand down the verdict. And the scene in the book has it such that the judge comes before the criminal and kneels before him and apologizes to the criminal for being a part of a society that led to the creation of such nefarious acts. So I'm not trying to avoid your question, but I would suggest that I think it's our responsibility as citizens to provide opportunities for all members of our citizenry to live productive and healthy lives. Now, not everyone takes advantage of that, and some pursue avenues of criminality and illegal behavior. But the extent to which we can, via our actions, prevent criminals from being created in the first place, that is our responsibility. So how do we do that? We tutor children in our schools, and we make sure that they stay in school and get a proper education. We make sure that young people feel loved. We make sure that those who are on the outcast, or maybe those who are members of marginalized groups, know that they are active participants within their society. So again, I hope I'm not avoiding your question, but I would suggest that as we think about community and its intersection with the criminal courts, as you mentioned, I think we do have a responsibility as citizens to prevent those actions from happening in the first place, and we can do that via our civic participation. Now, with respect to the other young man who asked the question about those who are burdened with the basically daily lives that they have to live and don't have the ability to necessarily give to important social causes, and I've thought about this a little bit. You know, in America, during the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s, there were a group of people called the Freedom Riders, and there were many others who went to the South during that time to fight for racial justice. And I was born in 1970, and I've thought about it, and I thought, you know, if I lived back in those days, I would want to be on the first train to the South, to be battling these issues of civil rights. But the fact of the matter is, I know that probably the largest thing that would hinder me from doing so is being able to leave my job, to be able to leave my spouse. I've got bills to pay. And so as much as I hold this lofty ideal of being a member of some great important movement, often the thing that prevents us from participating in important social causes is simply the day-to-day life of paying bills, our responsibility to family, and our many other duties. But I would suggest that I think that we, even in busy lives, we can at the least find ways to connect with other people. And if it's a small issue of simply, you know, even giving a smile to someone or a seat to an elderly person on a bus, that doesn't change the world, but it's a small step that almost anyone can do. We can all show compassion and acceptance to other people around us. And if I acknowledge the fact that those who are able to serve do so because they have the freedom to do so. And often those who receive our charity are under no choice but to have to receive our charity because they're poor. You know, I'm going to come feed you because you're poor. I have the freedom to do that. But I'm poor. I don't have the freedom to reject that service. I'm hungry, so I have to take this meal. And so I fully recognize the sort of privilege and freedom that exists in the ability to serve others. But my only recommendation is for those who have many pressing obligations in their life is to find some small quarter or place where you can make the world just a little bit better, and so that the world knew that you were here.
In the blasphemy issue.
Yeah, I want to also respond Gary's questions. I think it's related to my questions about the blasphemy law. It's double-edged sword. You can use a free press and civic participations for a good cause in criminal justice process, but sometimes it also can be used to and led to unfair trial. And our Jakarta governor, and it's really related to your questions about the blasphemy law. If you ask me about my opinion, I think the blasphemy law should be revised and repealed, but we're not built, our country doesn't build in the strong foundations of First Amendment of free speech in its citizens. And it's heavily focusing on security, stability, and etc. So the government will use this narrative to, propose more harsher punishment regarding blasphemy law, because they tend to think that if it's not being punished, then the society will not be stable, because someone will be, labeled as a, what do you call it? Menghina suatu agama. Yeah, it's trick questions, and I love that you ask these questions, because in our penal code, if you read all the articles, we're getting to more, right, in terms of the criminal acts. Like I mentioned earlier, blasphemy law is still there. The criminal law that criminalized person who criticized president, it's still there, even though it has been repealed by the Constitutional Court. And it also criminalized people who showcasing or displaying contraceptions, even though it's for, educational purpose. Consensual sex also being criminalized, and so many new crimes that will be enacted by our penal code, and it's real terrible.
Thank you. Unfortunately, that's will be the last question and the last Q&A session. So before I close this discussion, I would like to ask our three speakers to give a closing statement on this topic. Yeah.
Once again, it's a real pleasure to be here tonight, and I want to thank you all for coming out and showing your interest and your engagement with this issue. Brian said he was the odd duck up here, but I feel like I'm next to two accomplished lecturers here. I hope that my perspectives on what I've seen and what I've dealt with back home was helpful to give you some perspective, maybe. Certainly I'm not an expert on civic engagement or on Indonesian law, the state of things as they are here today, but I do hope it was helpful in some way. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Well, I would just add that I am very happy to be here, and I'm very honored to serve with this distinguished panel and distinguished moderator, and I appreciate the questions and the opportunity just to share a little bit, and I appreciated the time here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, and I appreciate the discussions that I had today, and I really want to ask and invite all of you that really interest and have a concern about the criminal justice reform to work with other civil society organizations or other human rights activists just to propose better criminal justice reform. which protects human rights and also, eliminate corruptions.
Right. Thank you so much. Please give a big round of applause for all of speakers tonight. If you still have any questions for them, they will be still around, right, after this event. So we hope that this discussion will help us to enrich our understanding and view on what can we do to improve the transparency, to enhance transparency, and how to adapt best practices from both countries. Once again, thank you very much. I'm Anindita, thank you so much, and see you on the next discussion. Thank you very much.
Can I get another warm round of applause, please? And as part of At America tradition, I would like to invite all the speakers and the moderator to take a photo with the At America logo. And I would like to invite Pak Jed to come up on stage to take the photo. All right. Thank you all so much for coming. I hope you all enjoyed today's presentation. Have a good evening and see you all at the next At America event. Bye-bye.